Thank you, Professor. I think you have really, with your 15 points, you have unraveled the knots which have kind of, come up in the minds of all the observers of, Gulf politics and GCC as to what are the issues involved. And some of the things which you have said are really, something which is not really discussed in public domain, especially in terms of the, the economic cost which, for example, the Qatar had to kind of endure for the last 3.5 years. And then also while we have seen references to the differences, some differences or, problems between UAE and Saudi Arabia so far as their understanding of how to confront Iran or how to look at Iran is concerned. There has not been much, discussion on that. And perhaps you were also referring to your number, the 10th point when you were saying that, MBS's decision to end dispute and, how that kind of differs a little bit from how MBZ would have liked to approach the issue. So I think some of these issues will certainly be come up in the questions from the eminent members in the audience. So I'll start with maybe Ambassador Sanjay Singh. Sir, if you have any questions, comments, I'm sure you'll have a lot of them, but over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Kéchichian. You deserve a bottle of Ararat cognac.
Thank you.
I am sure you're aware of, you're familiar with that.
I am.
Very good. You've raised a number of issues and you've left many issues unanswered. So let me, and we are all at the moment looking at this elephant like the 6 wise men or 10 wise men and approaching it from different angles. And we all see in this different realities. But let me begin by saying that this is a very welcome development. That goes without saying, and this is what India officially also said. That the spokesman of the government of India said that we welcome this development. So this is a very welcome development after years of 4 years of turbulence in the region, and especially in the Arabian Peninsula. This is a very welcome development. I also see it as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia assuming its traditional role as a leader of a cohesive and united GCC. It is also, I see it as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia reasserting its leadership role in the Arab world. And if I may say so, it is also the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia reasserting its role in the Islamic world. And finally, a reconciliation with Qatar also indicates, and this may be far-fetched and its argument, and it is arguable, a readiness to deal with Iran's challenges in a more accommodative manner. I also say in the end that perhaps this is the beginning of the Biden effect. Now, I've heard various figures being bandied about for the cost to Qatar, and one authoritative source gives us at about $39 billion of drawdown from its sovereign fund of about $359 or $360 billion. But, when I visited Qatar in 2019, the Qataris very proudly said that this is Qatari butter, this is Qatari cheese, and this is Qatari milk, and we do not anymore need to import it. So I think Qatar has learned to live on its own and by itself. So that is another thing. But 10 years after the Arab Spring, which was largely, to an extent, a great boost for the Brotherhood, it hasn't gone away despite the reverses it has faced. And I think the Gulf monarchies will have to learn how to deal with it. Whether this is the beginning of that process will be seen, because I see I noticed, maybe I was wrong, a certain lack of appetite for this deal among some of the members of the quartet. And does it mean a realignment of forces in the region?
Mm-hmm.
A precursor. You can see all of these things, or you can see nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And these can all be very speculative. But I leave it at that. Thank you very much, Muddassir, for inviting me to say a few words.
Ambassador Singh, you have raised several very important issues about which I concur that dramatic changes are underway, and time will tell which direction it will go. Let me address some of the points that you raised in ways that perhaps we don't usually think about, but we ought to. One, tradition still plays a very important role on the Arabian Peninsula, among the Bedou, among the traditional communities that make up the peoples of the region. Qatar not only shares tribal and religious affinities with their Saudi brethren, but Qatar is an Arab country at the end of the day. It is not part of Persia. It is part of the Arab world. Now, of course, realpolitik comes into play sometimes, and when you are cornered and when you are identified by the finger, you tend to be more than happy to become independent, produce your own cheese, your own milk, your own butter, etc., etc. And it's always good to live on one's own. There is no question about that. Saudis fall into this trap as well. A few years ago, they've spent billions of dollars trying to produce wheat in the desert. You can, if you have enough money to spend, you can become independent of your neighbor. You can become independent of a lot of different countries. You can produce tomatoes in the hot desert, except that each tomato will cost you $10. It's not cost effective at the end of the day to do that. And the Qataris, of course, were, how should I say, they were touched in their soul. The French have an expression that is very useful. Their amour propre was hit. Their pride was hit, literally, because they were accused of supporting terrorists. This is a serious accusation. It is not something to take lightly. But as the expression goes, where there is smoke, there is surely fire. And it is true that one of the things that keeps Qatar and Turkey close to each other is the fact that both of them support the Muslim Brotherhood to a certain extent. Now, whether or not the other Arab countries are right or wrong in opposing the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, that's for them to decide. My observation is the following. And you identified correctly, in my judgment, the fact that Saudi Arabia is reasserting itself, both in the Arab world as well as in the Muslim world. Mohammed bin Salman means business. He is a leader with a vision. He is taking risks, which is very unusual for Saudi officials. Saudis generally are more inclined to go along and not to create all kinds of problems. But this is not the situation right now. Mohammed bin Salman is strong. He believes in himself. He takes risks. Sometimes he makes mistakes in doing so, but he is a leader in the true sense of the word. Whether he will succeed or he will fail, time will tell. We will see what happens. Having said this, you and I have got to come to terms with the opposite as well. What is the opposite? The fact that the Iranians are truly interested in hegemony in the Gulf region, and that they consider that it is their responsibility to provide the security of the Gulf region. Repeatedly, as you know far better than me, repeatedly they call on all foreign powers led by the United States to get out of the region. They don't even want Indians in the region. They want everybody out. It's their lake. It's their Gulf. It's theirs. So they're entitled to it. So therefore, you have two opposing sides to this dilemma. Now, perhaps I'm not answering your question directly, but I'm saying that we have a conflict of leadership and a conflict of pride. In the Qatari-Saudi dispute, you have leadership problems and you have pride problems. How these are going to be resolved, time will tell. It's only been a week since the summit, but at least as His Royal Highness Turki Faisal said, where there is forgiveness and reconciliation, a recovery is a done deal. I agree with him.
Thank you, sir. I think one of the points which sir was saying, and that it's also a lot to do with the geopolitical developments. There's a change in Washington. There are new alliances being made. But one of the questions, the moment I looked at that, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have decided to reconciliation. One of the things which also came to my mind is: are there any geoeconomic, factors also responsible for such a decision? Especially given the fact that Qatar has to host the 2022 World Cup, and then the Gulf economies have kind of been affected very seriously by the COVID-19. Like any other part of the world, other countries. So is that also playing some sort of a role? Perhaps you can reflect on that during your response. May I now request Pant sir, who is also here with us. Sir, if you have any comments or questions, we would be enriched by your analysis and your comments on the developments. Okay. Looks like sir has some network issues. Maybe if sir comes back, we can have comments. May I request Ramakrishnan sir? Sir, if you have any comments or questions, your take on the situation.
Professor Kéchichian, I enjoyed your lecture.
Thank you.
The old question, we all remember when the GCC was formed in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution and the threat of export of the revolution to the monarchies in the Gulf. Even though it was that security atmosphere that contributed to the formation of GCC, many other factors, economic and other factors came into play in GCC. But a core of it still is, obtaining security to the region. And Iran factor from the beginning of GCC, that persists, and that's one of the major reasons why they are coming together also. So is there any pattern of change in the perception towards security in the Gulf region with, vis-a-vis Iran, that you could see over the last 40 years of the existence of GCC, because that becomes an important engine for the countries to come together through this agreement.
Yes, obviously the security architecture of the Gulf region has changed dramatically during the past 40 years after the GCC was created. I've written a book on the GCC alliance, as you may know, and in which I talk about all of the different scenarios that occurred over the past 4 decades or so. Now, the security architecture within the GCC countries has always been relatively weak, except for the past 5 years, 6 years, where we have seen dramatic changes, incidentally, including in Qatar. I mean, despite the boycott, blockade, the Qataris have acquired a number of very sophisticated weapons. Not all of them have been delivered yet, but nevertheless, they're on their way coming in. And Saudi Arabia has invested tremendous amounts of money in rebuilding its military as well. The Iranians are very strong, and they have their own military industrial complex, but because of the boycotts on them, because of the sanctions that are imposed, they cannot really accomplish all the things they want to accomplish in terms of non-nuclear weapons. That is one of the reasons why they are pushing so fast and so quickly to acquire nuclear weapons. Make no mistake about the fact that the Iranians are very much interested in the nuclear deal that they've signed in 2015 with the Western European countries and the United States and Russia and China, all of the major powers. Nevertheless, they are still committed to their hegemonic agenda in the region. Therefore, whatever architecture we talk about on the Arabian Peninsula, it has to take into account the reality that the Iranians mean business. Now, can the Arab countries defend themselves against such a presence? The answer today is no, they cannot. One has to be realistic about this. The answer today is no. The Arabian Peninsula is too valuable and it's too important for the global economies, for it to be left as a prey for a regional hegemon that can very easily take over. And let's not forget that there is also an ideological cost here, not just an economic cost, not just financial issue. There is also an ideological commitment, which is very important, whereby there are Iranian clerics who want to occupy Mecca and Medina. And in fact, they go so far as saying that Mecca and Medina need to be liberated. This is their rhetoric. Somehow Mecca and Medina are occupied territories, occupied by the Al Saud, and that we must liberate Mecca and Medina from these usurpers of power. So therefore, there is an ideological aspect to this hegemonic policy. Now, having said all of this, the reality is that the Arab Gulf countries, the alliance that has been created in the GCC, cannot function, cannot operate fully without Western cooperation and Western assistance. Even Indian assistance and Indian cooperation. India will play a much bigger role. I have written this in my GCC book some years ago, that I see a bigger role for India down the line. And one of the reasons, incidentally, why the Iranians desperately wants to get their hands on nuclear weapons is because of the Indian-Pakistani struggle as well. And they don't want to be left a prey to either India or Pakistan. So therefore, that aspect also comes into play as well. So therefore, to be very specific about your question, it's true that there are economic prices to be paid. but it's also true that there are ideological prices to be paid here as well. This is a multi-level struggle that is going on. And the Iranian Revolution is only 40 years old. You know, it reminds me a little bit of a anecdote. When Nixon went to China, he met with Chu Enlai, and Nixon asked Chu Enlai a question. I'm sure you've heard the story before.
Yes.
About the French Revolution. And he was saying, it's, you know, the French Revolution has been going on for 200 years. It's still too early to find out what happened.
Right.
We will see.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the comments, and thank you for the response. May I request Samina ma'am, if you have any question or comments?
Yeah. Thank you, Muddassir. Thank you for that opportunity. Thank you, Professor, for your very amazingly well-calibrated remarks. And I would like your comments on, we're hearing quite a lot about the suddenness of this agreement. So do you really think it was sudden, or it was something in the making? That is one. The other thing is, when they talk about all this forgiveness, is this really forgiveness to their own self for being being such a strategic failure? Is there any indication that they realize that it was being a strategic failure? Thank you.
I love this question. This is a brilliant question. We always forgive ourselves first. You are 100% right. So the forgiveness comes to also forgive ourselves for the sins that we have committed against ourselves and our brethren. Brilliant question. I agree with you. No, it was not sudden. This has been in the works for several months now. In fact, as far as I know, the discussions between Saudi Arabia and Qatar have been going on indirectly through the Omani and Kuwaiti government representatives for about 2.5 years. They've been on both sides, private conversations through back channel avenues to see whether or not this reconciliation can take place. And in fact, the Omanis played a very, very important role in bringing the two sides together. Now, incidentally, the one person that was present in the GCC Al-Ula summit that was also present in all the previous GCC summits was Sayyid Fahad bin Mahmoud, the #2 man in the Sultanate of Oman, the Deputy Prime Minister for Ministerial Council Affairs, who has the institutional memory of what the GCC has done throughout. Now, you notice that, for example, Sheikh Khalifa of the UAE does not go to the summits. He is sick for years. He has been replaced by Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. He never goes to these things. And Sultan Qaboos, before he passed away, for years did not go, something that Sultan Haytham now continues in his state. The Bahraini king did not show up. The Saudi king did not show up. The only two monarchs that were present were the Kuwaiti and Qatari rulers that were present. Everybody else was represented by #2, essentially. So therefore, this was not sudden. It was being prepared. And a lot of people who are now saying that this is not going to accomplish much are not taking into account all of the background preparations that go into these kinds of meetings. They did not write the communique or the declaration in the 4 or 5 hours that they were together in Al-Ula. If you look at the document, it's a huge document, multi-page long. All of this was prepared ahead of time. So it was not sudden, it was coming. Now the question is whether now the reconciliation will be strengthened. What next steps will be taken? Already we are seeing dramatic changes. Al Jazeera is still operating, but the rhetoric has gone down. Nobody is insulting the King of Saudi Arabia on Doha in Doha today. People in private might be saying bad things, but not in public. And the good aspect of it, the other good aspect of this reconciliation is that families that were separated were now able to reunite. This is always a good thing. Families were indeed separated. And now this has changed for the better, I hope.
Thank you, Professor. May I now request Sir, if you want to come in here. You are in mute, sir.
Thanks, Muddassir. Professor Kéchichian, I'm finding it rather difficult. The reconciliation between the leaders can be done rather swiftly. If I go back, I can say the same thing about the Oslo. Suddenly, Rabin can say that Arafat is my peace partner. Arafat can say Rabin is my peace partner after both of them were abusing each other for 30 years. But eventually we found out the reconciliation did not last. But if you look at it, the tension has created a very narrow nationalistic discourse, especially in Qatar. They felt that no, that we were treated very badly by our neighbors. So the reconciliation between the leaders, it needs some time to percolate for people to forget. Because I find it, this is going to be in a lingering memory for a lot of time. It will always be the gorilla in the room. Even if the Saudis and everything say normal things, you will not forget that you are pushed into a corner by your bigger neighbor. But do you think that more than the reconciliation and forgiveness, and what do other countries, especially these two countries, can actually do to overcome the popular perception of the other? Thanks.
This is a major challenge. I agree with you 100%. The reconciliation was among the leaders and not the populations, and this will take time. Mercifully, the Qatari population is so small that there are not too many people to reconcile. Now, I don't mean that don't misunderstand me, please. I don't mean that in any pejorative sense. I mean that as a good thing in a way. It's true that in my remarks, I talked about pride and the fact that the Qatari pride was really hurt. But let's face it, the Qatari population is minuscule. We are talking now, the latest demographics figures, of course, everybody wants to show that they are growing very fast and birth rates are very fast in the Arabian Peninsula. But the population itself, the genuine citizen population of Qatar, is less than 200,000 citizens. We are talking about all ages combined. It's a very small community. Of course, there are almost 2 million people that live in Qatar, but the overwhelming majority of these people are expatriate workers, including thousands of Indians who toil there. So therefore, there are not too many people to reconcile. But the reality is that nobody is going to forget what happened, and nobody is going to forgive all that quickly. However, this is the beauty of Islam, where on earth, forgiveness earns a lot of goodwill, divine goodwill. So therefore, forgiveness is a religious duty. And the more you forgive, the more Allah welcomes you and likes you. This is something that is extraordinary, and it's a good thing. And therefore, I am optimistic that over the course of a few years, I don't think it will take decades. I think just a few years, if everything goes according to plan and the reconciliation moves over concrete steps, I think that you will see people reconcile and come together and be the good neighbors that they were at one point or another. Time will tell, of course, but I'm optimistic.
Thanks.
Sir, and thanks, Professor. Maybe before we kind of close the discussion, there are 2 points which I thought maybe I can kind of ask you. One is obviously the point which you were mentioning during your presentation about the Turkey-Iran factor and UAE-Saudi differences. So perhaps you can throw some light. And the other point which I thought maybe I can get some ideas from you about the geo-economical aspect of this, this timing of the reconciliation.
One second, Muddassir. Also,
Yes,
the MBS, MBZ, the difference is it expanded?
Yes. UAE Saudi differences and MBS, MBZ differences which you wanted to throw light. Thanks, sir. So,
happy to. Well, let me take the last one first. Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed have a close relationship, of course. They get along on many different issues, but Mohammed bin Zayed has a lot more experience. He's older, of course. He has a lot more experience, and he is determined to transform not just the UAE into the Sparta of the Middle East, but to also make sure that it has a protective role to play. And he and Mohammed bin Salman get along rather well. People have tried to create a wedge between the two men, but they have not succeeded. But the UAE recognizes that the big brother on the Arabian Peninsula is in fact Saudi Arabia, and that there is going to be some kind of an accommodation to Riyadh, no question about that. Now, when Mohammed bin Salman becomes the king of Saudi Arabia, you will see the dynamics change, because obviously, for the time being, of course, both of these men are number 2 officials. They are not number 1 officials. So they behave like number 2s behave, essentially. They are always taking into account what the big boss is thinking. And they have to make sure that nobody is upset, because there are regional issues that need to be taken into account, not just personal interests. So therefore, the dynamic will change when both of these men accede to the throne. One can only hope that both will make the right decisions and that they will cooperate far more than people assume. And they do cooperate a great deal with each other. Now, this relates to the UAE differences with Turkey. This is a real issue. Now, the UAE and Bahrain have reconciled with Israel, and they've established diplomatic relations. And the Qataris will probably follow suit before long as well. Even the Saudis are thinking along those lines. There could be more reconciliations down the line, but the relationship with Turkey is a very different issue. There is, as I'm sure you know, there is the Arabs and Turks have fought. There is blood that has been shed between these people over the course of 400 or 500 years. And don't forget that Turkey, during the Ottoman Empire, had controlled the Hijaz. Mecca and Medina were under control of the Ottoman Empire, and wars and bloodshed. I'm not just talking about Lawrence of Arabia and all his shenanigans and how the British manipulated. The British did not just screw India, they've screwed the Arab world as well. So, you have a lot of baggage that go along with it. Mohammed bin Zayed does not want Turkey to have a foothold in Qatar or anywhere else on the Arabian Peninsula. Today, there are 3,500 Turkish soldiers permanently stationed in Qatar. And this is a foreign presence in the region. Of course, people argue that the Americans have Al-Udaid Air Base in Qatar as well, 10,000 soldiers, and that the United States Air Force has access to Al-Dhafra Air Base in Abu Dhabi. The French have a permanent base there as well. The Americans also have a presence everywhere else in the region. But again, I don't want to compare a major global power like the United States with a regional power like Turkey. So therefore, there is this fundamental geostrategic difference. But add to that, Muddassir, a very important point, which I hinted at in my presentation earlier. There is an ideological difference over the Muslim Brotherhood. Make no mistake about this. Mohammed bin Zayed does not want the Muslim Brotherhood to gain any foothold anywhere on the Arabian Peninsula. This is a fundamental difference of opinion. And there will be problems between the UAE and Turkey over the next few years. Mark my words for it. This is something to watch for. Now, finally, about the geoeconomic issues. Ambassador Singh, a few moments ago, correctly stated that the Qatari sovereign fund expended almost $40 billion during the past 3 years. This is probably an optimistic figure. Now, I have seen some numbers that are even higher than that. Of course, I don't know. I don't have concrete evidence in my hands. But what the Qataris have spent and what the Saudis have spent as a counter to the Qataris are huge amounts of money. There is an impoverishment of the Arabian Peninsula. Long before the coronavirus essentially froze the economic welfare of the entire region. So therefore, the biggest lesson, the most important lesson of this boycott blockade really was the geo-economic cost involved. This is the topic of a brilliant paper, actually. Somebody should really write this paper and publish it. The geo-economic costs of the blockade boycott over a period of 3 years. It's a lot of work. It's not going to be easy to write this paper because you need to get all the information about the different contracts that were signed, et cetera, but I'm willing to wager that it's way beyond $40 billion. And I don't like the fact that all of the countries of the Gulf have been dramatically affected by these expenditures. On the other hand, this hopefully is a good lesson and that it will not be repeated and that people will learn that sometimes emotions should not drive policy.
I think you kind of ended on a very definitive note that emotions should not really drive, policy decisions. I think that is something not only important for Gulf countries, but perhaps everywhere else in the world as well.
I agree.
Very, very important point. On the point which you were saying about the idea that MBZ doesn't really want Turkey to have a presence. I remember a couple of years back, and this is not something which is perhaps just one-time affair, that and this refers to your point also earlier about Iranian clerics talking about liberating Mecca and Medina from. I think even some of the Turkish ministers earlier have referred to Mecca and Medina being in some kind of a occupied status, and they want a larger council to have a control over the holy sites. And I think that touches also a lot of sensitive nerves.
Absolutely, I agree. A lot of people have an interest in Mecca and Medina. For some reason, they consider it to be occupied territory by the Saud usurpers. They have to go. I don't know where they're going to go, but this is, of course, silly. But I agree with you. It's there, and we have to come to terms with it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm very happy to have had this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think at this note, on this note, I would thank Professor Kéchichian for his very enlightening, discussion. This was certainly a very exhilarating discussion for all of us. For the formal concluding words, may I request sir to say the final.